agony and the ecstasy of building with React Native for TVs. Anytime you have to type in a username and password or an email and password with a remote, a team is failing. Someone has not thought about that first launch experience.
What you get when you're focusing on multi-platform development, especially with React Native, and it almost seems obvious, is you get to focus on the business requirements. You're not trying to go, okay, what can I do here? Is this possible in this, if I'd use this kind of technique on this platform, writing this specific code? It's much more of how can I solve this problem for the user? Right? How do I solve the business requirement?
You bought this Fire TV stick, let's say, 10 years ago. Now you are upgrading your main screen in your home. Are you going to throw out this Fire TV stick or you're gonna put it in your basement? This is still working.
And it was probably set up by a loved one years ago that you didn't set up. How often do I find out from my family, oh, how did we set this thing up? And then I discover, oh, it's an old Sony TV, but it has a newer stick.
You got to start with the unit test, obviously. Integration test, my personal favorite. That's the sweet spot. That's where you're going to be able to balance performance, the runtime of your tests, alongside the coverage, that higher level coverage you're looking for. You can literally simulate the whole focus management or user journey of a user if you've written a sound integration test.
React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform.
Hey everyone, this is Łukasz Kludziński and you are listening to React Universe on Air. Today we're gonna talk about TVs again. And you might be thinking, why the hell are you talking about TVs on the next podcast? So TVs is a niche subject, but I really believe that I learned a lot during my 3 years of working on TV project, and the knowledge that you can get from challenges that you find only on TVs that you will see here can help you out being a better developer, basically. Can help you out on other teams, on other projects, in other platforms as well. So to discuss those kind of things, I gathered a group of TV professionals, TV experts, and first one is Mike Khirallah from DTV. Hello, Mike. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Mike Khirallah. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering for our client teams, building a multi-platform React Native codebase, application targeting ultimately 8 platforms at this point. It's really, really enjoyable. Lots of challenges, very unique kind of experience overall. And you just learn so much every single day. It's really, really, really enjoyable.
Cool. I'd love to talk about those challenges with you specifically, so we'll do that definitely. My next guest is Chris Trag from Amazon. Hello, Chris. Can you introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone. So yeah, I'm Chris. I lead developer evangelism for Fire devices, so Fire TVs, and for Alexa and for games. And really excited to be on the show today.
Cool. And like I said, I'm Łukasz, and I used to be working on TV project for the past 3 years. So we have few different perspectives here. We have technical evangelism, so community perspective, like knowledge perspective of the whole ecosystem. We have very team leading perspective, engineering management perspective from Mike, and my perspective from day-to-day development of that kind of things. So yeah, let's just dig in. Guys, I have a question for you right from the start. This is gonna be a pop quiz for you. I'm gonna ask a question, and after you hear the question, I want you to say a number to me, okay? Really fast with no nuances around there. How many TV platforms are out there?
Oh my gosh. Okay, this is good.
This is not how pop quizzes work, You should hit the button and just say the number.
Oh gosh, I'm going to go with 12.
Are you considering there an umbrella
That's
under
the thing. I want to ask follow-up questions, but he doesn't.
Yeah, there are no nuances here. And also, I don't know the proper answer as well. I researched a little bit and the numbers vary. Our producer Ola just wrote 9 in the chat. So, there are no wrong answers here. And we can talk about nuances after this question.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with...
I want you to ask how many distros of Linux are there?
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's such a good, I think, analogy, right? Because so looking at Android TV and Fire TV, are they different? Is this one platform, or those are 2 separate platforms? Google TV and Android TV, are they the same platform or are they different, right? So like in TV world, we have those kind of nuances that we have to navigate. And this episode will be about navigating the nuances. By the way, ChatGPT told me it's 18.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. ChatGPT is not really good with, counting things, but it listed a lot of like different platforms.
It's like including Shockwave. It's going old school.
Probably, yeah.
And it's really about how much different, you know what I mean? Because you have these subtle differences, like for example, accessibility is different between Android TV and Fire TV, right? That's just a matter of fact, right? And React Native does a pretty good job abstracting over that and making sure that you have the utilities to overcome those differences. But there are cases with accessibility that it simply does not have yet, right? That we have to implement in app code land, if you will. And we have a whole library of tools that we have built out to accommodate that kind of cross-platform abstraction that we need that React Native doesn't fill fully.
Yeah, and not even talking about React Native. Mike, maybe you can start by like explaining not really the TV product, but like from the mindset of product of like TV streaming app, what is it like to navigate this landscape of fragmented ecosystem, and how many platforms you have for your product, and like how do you plug in to that app the next and next and next platforms?
DirecTV is everywhere, I feel like.
It is. It's so true. Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's all about assessing the requirements, right? We need to understand what does a platform support. For example, if we know that accessibility is going to be different between Fire TV and Android TV, when we go to launch Android TV, we need to make sure we've cataloged all the different details and nuances of said platform to make sure we accommodate and provide the user with the best possible user experience. One of the things that we're, talking about earlier, which is really interesting, is this idea of supporting older TV models, right? And if you think about it, you probably think to yourself, okay, well, when I'm developing a traditional web app, it tends to be relatively straightforward because you're only going to support back so many versions. And Chrome is usually good about staying up to date, and Safari is usually good about forcing you to stay up to date. But on Tizen, for example, or older TV models, right, you actually have to support a whole host of older browsers, because again, under the hood, you have Tizen using their own flavor of Chromium that they've customized. You have to support back to Chromium 2017, right? Or essentially, version 47, which only supports so many of the newer JavaScript syntax, right? It doesn't support ES6 fully. It supports ES5. So you have to put in those additional transpilation steps that essentially could impact other future models, right? Like 2022 doesn't need to be transpiled down to 20, ES5. It just doesn't make sense. But
if I can intercept for a little bit, because I think we are going too deep into the naming conventions and like all of the different things. So let's explain a few things. Tizen, smart TV from Samsung, right? You can write React apps for it. Not really React Native, but React apps for it. And you use JavaScript to do that. And some of those, I'm just like bottom lining what you just said, because I know all of that, but I'm worried that our listeners might not be up to date with their latest, Tizen.
Yeah, and the terminology. Right, exactly. So to build for Tizen, for a React Native application or code base, you have to use React Native for web, right, which is just a package you can utilize that helps with that kind of just overall compatibility between, instead of having views for components and text, you have traditional divs, etc., right? And links, right? A tags, right? So in order to accomplish that, you use this React Native for web package. You still write traditional React Native code, except for the native parts, right? And you're able to produce a JavaScript only bundle, or if you're feeling ambitious, a WASM or WebAssembly included bundle if you're trying to target the later models of Tizen, which is, again, a Samsung TV OS, right? And essentially, you're able to accomplish a nice overall TV application experience on a web-based TV platform.
So we've all seen those tweets from Evan Bacon from Expo, like slicing up the like App Store and Play Store number one apps. What is using React Native? What is using Expo? What's native? Do you have some of that data on App Store, on Amazon App Store, and you can tell us like what's the percentage of React Native apps versus native apps on App Store in general, but also like for TV in particular?
Yeah, I think I could definitely talk on like industry stats. I think for React Native, it's interesting. React Native on Fire devices, it totally depends if you're tablets, which we have a lot of React Native apps on tablets, versus TVs. Like that React Native for TV use cases, it's newer and we're seeing a lot of growth there. I think that, yeah, so to recap kind of the major ones, right? So you have Android TV, you have the Android open source project. Fire TV is a branch, is a fork off of the Android open source project. It just has Amazon's payment services and identity provider, Google Play, Google's Android TV experience has Google Auth, all that stuff. You have players like Roku. I used to actually run DevRel at Roku. Roku has like their own proprietary setup. Samsung Tizen, a Linux distro essentially with their own additions for payment services. WebOS, LG, you talk about web views. And then you have, of course, Apple TV, which is based on tvOS. And so I think those are major players. I can say, talking to the different app stores myself, I can say that I've seen both on iOS and on the Apple App Store and on the Google Play Store. I have seen that at least 1/3 to 2/3 of the apps that are in the entertainment category are, if you actually look at the apps themselves, they're powered by React Native. It's a lot more than folks realize, especially in the last couple of years. Now, you'll always have some apps that are like, we're only going to build native. But if you look across the web experience and if you look on mobile, and then if you're able to actually look at the headers of the apps themselves, you start to see that React Native is showing up everywhere. Yeah, I can say what's interesting for us is we kind of fell backwards into React Native. Fragmentation for TVs is, we can talk on it when you're ready, but like it's a real pain point for our developers, and our developers are building for many of these platforms. So I actually do care about you building for Roku and Tizen and WebOS, because the more pain it is for you to launch on more platforms, the harder it is for you to publish on Fire TV and elsewhere. And so I think React Native has been pretty interesting in how it's helping the developers we work with make sure they have a great experience. Like if you're watching on TV, on a Fire TV, you're probably also doing a second screen on your phone or on a tablet or something. And so that combined experience is like definitely top of mind for us for developer experience right now. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but
I've listened to all of it and I have a great follow-up. So let's lean into the fragmentation, if you already mentioned it.
Yeah.
Do you think fragmentation is the biggest driver of React Native on TVs? Or what are the other considerations for TV developers?
It's tricky because when I was coming up, I worked at Evernote and some of the more mobile apps from the 2010s. And when I was working on those teams, what I noticed pre-React Native days is the Android team was wildly separate was a walled group from the iOS team. And that was wildly different from the Windows desktop team building the same client. So the idea was we're going to build the best client possible for the platform it's on, which I do believe in. And I do think there is space in the React Native world to do those custom features that get you the most benefit. On the same side, post React Native, what I've really appreciated is you start to make better decisions of what should be a backend reusable service, what should be a turbo module, what should be something that doesn't need to be in the UI versus what can be really feel native to the app you're on. And so that merging of these mobile and web teams that actually now have to work together, where 2010 in San Francisco, I was watching these teams very competitive with each other and actually kind of being very redundant in the services and the ways that they were approaching how they were fetching and caching data. And the truth is, again, that end customer is they're using multiple of those devices together in their watching experience. And so, yeah, I think to answer your question, I've definitely noticed that React Native, whether it was React Native or Kotlin multi-platform or some other, I think the dream of one framework to publish anywhere, we're still getting where no one's going to pretend it's there for TVs yet. But I do think that act of making the back end and front end teams work together to really build that best experience possible, you just make better decisions that way in unison. And so I love that, I meet these different major sports team channels and they're oh yeah, we actually all sit together and we're responsible for these 5 and the back end team's responsible for the identity provider. And then we have our designers that are constantly, I love when I hear that designers are switching between the mobile experience, the web experience, and streaming, because that's actually great to have a team that has that context versus I only care about this view or this presentation layer.
You know what else is interesting, Lucas, on that? Just extending on Chris's point here.
What you get when you're focusing on multi-platform development, especially with React Native, and it almost seems obvious, is you get to focus on the business requirements. You're not trying to go, okay, what can I do here? Is this possible in this, if I'd use this kind of technique on this platform, writing this specific code? It's much more of, how can I solve this problem for the user, right? How do I solve the business requirement? Which is a really big win because you're driving the value for the business when you ask those questions. And if you have tooling and you have a framework that provides that to you where you can focus on the business requirements, it's going to be a win-win every time.
Well, I guess it's almost like we've shifted the discussion about implementation details to farther to the right? So like you said, Mike, we get some business requirements and then we don't have to figure out how to do them like 6 times on 6 different platforms. We do them one time on this like one React Native platform. And then down the road, maybe there will be some differences between the platforms, but it's shifted farther to the right and not like the beginning of the discussion of the implementation.
Right. It becomes marginal, right? It becomes that smaller piece that goes, okay, how do I unify this experience? And consistency for your user is key too, right? If they can go from a tablet experience and they exactly know how to reach for certain keys on their remote when they move to TV and go, oh, I know I remember that from my tablet. It's very similar. I know that this feature works in a very similar way. It's less cognitive load for them. Lots of wins overall for the end user. And that framework, if it's providing that unified experience out of the box for the most part, except for the margin, you're going to be winning, right? Overall.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that from director of engineering perspective. Like, how do you, as Mike Khirallah from DTV, make those decisions? So you get those business requirements and like, how do you drive your team with like React Native decisions and then with some platforms differences and then maybe some native code as well? Tell us about that.
So it comes down to a couple things. First, what we always have to keep top of mind, and a lot of people forget, is from a performance standpoint, React Native is not perfect, right? That's not its goal. That's not what it's trying to solve. So you have to keep that in your back of your mind if you're building a feature that needs to be heavily performant, right? If you're doing some very long virtualized list, right? You need to think to yourself, is the out-of-the-box flat list from React Native going to solve my problem? Or do I need something different? Do I need to look for the open source package from the community? And again, one of the huge benefits of React Native is you have this huge community, not just for, traditional mobile tablet apps, but the TV community is growing, right? You can reach to the community. You can look for these open source packages. You can try them out and you can gain that performance back because a lot of people have similar pain points in the community. So the goal up front, you should be assessing in the back of your head, okay, is this going to have performance impact if I simply implement it in a traditional, optimized or focused way, right? If the answer is, oh man, this needs significant performance focus on it, then obviously you want to assess whether or not it belongs on the JS side or on the native side. And I say that with a caveat because what I'm seeing, what the React Native team is producing lately is really impressive. Right? Even just the move to bridgeless, right? If anybody's familiar on the podcast with bridgeless, where they're basically taking Turbo modules and now they're removing the rest of the bridge from all the core implementation that's used under the hoods for things like timers, for example, which is ubiquitous in a lot of apps that have to leverage this. You're just going to keep getting those performance boosts over time, which is amazing, right? So one of the things that we also assess is, okay, if I over-optimize now, is React Native going to actually provide me that benefit in the short term? Should I really be focusing on this little piece of performance here? So the main things I think about when we're assessing the overall requirements is it's going to be performant. Are there going to be nuances around accessibility, right? Cross-platform accessibility. Are there nuances around focus management? Is this a very unique focus, custom focus journey, right? Because what a lot of people also don't realize is focus isn't consistent between platforms and you need to create these abstraction layers.
This is a new cans of worms, honestly.
Yeah, I won't even get into that right now. But those are like the main pieces we start to think about as we're cataloging the parts of a feature, right? Even just the remote presses, right? Currently, we're working on a project right now where we have to deal with very unique key bindings on a remote, which is different than what we've done before. And we need that to react and the user journey to be very specific to those key presses, which is very interesting. So you got to think about those unique situations that have to be native that you wouldn't necessarily just get out of the box from React Native.
You mentioned Flatlist, which is from community, which from experience, I know it's not TV first library. Nothing is. Almost nothing is, honestly. How do you decide if you're gonna take something new into your project? From community, from like external libraries, whether it's like Redux, which is very powerful state management, it's been around for ages, or this is something new as this flash list, which is not that new, but like it's a good example of something that was made in order to make performance better. But you and I know we had to like cut some corners in order to make it work for TV specific project.
So that's another great question. Overall, assessing open source community packages and weighing them against things that are provided out of the box in React Native, we run it like an experiment, right? We basically do it like we express the problem statement, we create a hypothesis, we implement a POC, we test the results and see what the outcome is. Does it align with our hypothesis? Are we seeing the performance improvement, for example? Are we seeing the functional improvement or the developer experience improvement from said package, right? And we run it like essentially like an experiment. And we tend to catalog all the open source community packages that would potentially fit the bill and create a pros and cons list associated to it as well. One of those things, like you mentioned, React, we have Redux integrated into our application. What we've noticed over time is Redux can be slow, right? If you have a very large application, which we do, Redux tends to bog down the overall performance. So when we were assessing, okay, what can we do instead? We don't want to just use raw state, use state everywhere if we need to be able to provide a solution that's performant. We want to avoid prop drilling, etc. Well, we assessed many other of the open source store or state management packages, right? And what we personally landed on after doing, experiments and determining whether or not, this package is, providing us what we need, we ended up landing on Zustan. And it's the perfect lightweight middle ground solution to handle state co-located with a certain subtree in React. And it works very well for our use case to keep the performance high. But we still leverage Redux. We're not planning to remove it because it's perfect where RTK query solves a lot of the networking or basic CRUD based user journeys that we need. So we like to weigh all the pros and cons, circling back, we like to weigh all the pros and cons for the open source community packages. We create our hypotheses, we run a POC, we determine the results, we assess whether or not it fits the bill for what we need.
You're listening to React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform with React and React Native.
Changing gears for a little bit, staying still in the community and libraries, I've came across this discussion on GitHub about React Native directory. And Chris, I noticed your name out there arguing for a new set of filters on that directory. Can you explain that topic a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So if anyone like watching the show isn't aware, reactnative.directory is this awesome resource where you can kind of go into like what we're talking about here. Like, how do I know which of my libraries that I'm using in my project will work if I go from iOS to Android to Windows to any kind of like, just help me save time and know what works. And, it's interesting. Yeah, it was like a lengthy pull request that my team put in, like lengthy discussion, but honestly, really good outcome. So Simek and Brent, a bunch of the devs that maintain the site, actually added this ability where if you look at the filters, you can see not only like which platform, so Android, iOS, Mac, tvOS, which of them like work out of the box with certain libraries, but also they've added a new feature which shows like compatibility, like works with FireOS, works with Expo Go. And what we're really excited about is we are going through all 1,200 libraries that are public for React Native. And as the Fire device team, we're going and testing every single one of them to verify that they work with FireOS or not. And, the things we're checking, like, does it work with Android? Does it work, not just does it work with Android, but does it work with Amazon's like in-app purchasing, with our identity providers, all that type of stuff? Because what's tricky is like, it's all like, for example, many of the TVs are built off the Android open source project. People don't realize what's the difference between Android, Google Play. It's like the difference is there's built-in payment and identity providers that are on the device if you're having a Google device versus if you're on Fire TV or another platform. And so that type of like clarity is really hard for devs. And so, yeah, I love this site as the place of truth now to be able to filter.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but like we have an episode about that. About GMS, Google Mobile Services, that include all of that in Android. So Android without Google Mobile Services is that just Android open source project that you can take and just like go ahead and create your new TV. We don't care. Like Mike will be happy to to put DirecTV up on that new device. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted
Well, and
you
what's
there.
interesting to that is people don't know there is way more Android open source project powered phones internationally, especially in Asia, than there are Google Play enabled phones. And so people don't realize like Xiaomi, Huawei, like any of the phones, if you're in East Asia, you can tell it's Android, but obviously in those regions, there's going to be different payment requirements. There's going to be different identity providers for the carriers. And so AOSP is so central to like many experiences. And I mean, we really benefit from it for sure on Fire devices, but not having that clarity of a dev is like, when I think of the user stories, like I don't want to waste time discovering that my navigation tool isn't going to work. Or I want to know, does tvOS, React Native Video, React Native Navigation, just tell me which libraries I know can work so that I can plan out my work. Because obviously, even if it's React Native is supported, Mike and different leaders who are deciding how to build for different platforms have to still make some decisions on like what changes do we got to make in order for it to work. And the more that companies, platforms like us can make it easier for the dev, I think is the right call. I think we all should be doing that across, Amazon, Samsung, LG, etc.
Yeah, and that's I was really, really glad reading that discussion that the conclusion is that this should be included, that we should have, as developers, more clarity which libraries support what. Are you saying this PR is already merged, or is it going to get merged? Or
Yeah,
what?
it actually just got merged. Yeah, they rehauled the filters. Just looking at it now, I guess you can share it in the show notes, but it's reactnative.directory. And if you click on filters, it's great. So now there's like, you can filter by platform. You can filter by status, right? So like which libraries support new architecture, which, have TypeScript types, what's been recently updated. And then there's also, what compatibility. So I would imagine, my hope is that more device manufacturers will start contributing to this project. Like I want to know what's going to work with, WebOS. For sure, at least FireOS, we're just adding more and more libraries that we've verified like work. And a developer themselves, like if you're building a React Native project, I would definitely recommend making a PR and adding like which platforms your library works on. Yeah, it's super helpful. So yeah, they've done a great, shout out to the, I guess, Expo team, Brent and Simek. Really cool to have a place of truth for all the libraries. Yeah, I know you hinted at the debate. Basically the debate was there's a gray area where like FireOS itself is not a platform. Like we definitely benefit from the Android open source project, but for sure, like there's some differences and nuances that affect you being able to build. And again, this all adds to the confusion. Really, it's the fragmentation of the devices, whereas React Native is bringing it all together. But yeah, I think we came to a great outcome. We are stoked. We have a lot of work ahead of us. We've done about 100 libraries, but we have about 900 to go, 1,000 to go. But there's an army of us here. So
What I understood from you saying 5 minutes earlier, that you have already tested 1,200 libraries, no?
No, we've done a couple hundred, but we're going through every single library individually. We're running both unit tests, we're running functional tests, and just doing spot checking like on our, fortunately with this stuff, the best way to have confidence that things will work is actually testing on a real device. Like simulators are great, but like you actually have to test it on a real like Fire TV or Fire tablet device. And so that's what we've, if we're going to give our developers and partners confidence, we kind of have to have done it, dog fooded ourselves. So yeah, it's kind of definitely a, New Year spring cleanup situation.
Let's stick around with testing, but I have just one digression that just like bites me in my mind right now. For me, it looks very similar to what Microsoft did a couple of years ago when they invested in React Native Windows, and they went through a bunch of very popular community libraries, and either they made support for Windows themselves, or they supported community to support React Native Windows, just as a platform provider to make sure that developers that want to use the libraries have confidence that they actually have what they need to like create libraries for that particular platform. So I think it's great.
Well, just real quick, I'll add to that. So I think one thing that's really broken in the React Native ecosystem right now is the way that the library models work is all the pressure is on these open source library maintainers or agencies, Callstack builds some amazing libraries, really leads by example. But the problem is all the pressures on the end developer where like, how do we switch this so that it's on the platforms to add support? So I've seen some projects. I know Mike from your team is poking around on some interesting, use cases, but like how could libraries be built towards a standard? We're very interested to see where that heads, because I think it's not fair for a dev who shared something into the world to make it easier to have to care and know about the 12 different nuances of devices and platforms. Yeah, it has to get fixed. I think that's pretty existential for the future of React Native to be the platform of choice.
Yeah, like I definitely agree. We have to do something about it. So let us know in the notes if you struggled with those kind of issues earlier, or like if you want to contribute, reach out to Chris. He has a lot of like different ideas how you can contribute to our ecosystem. And like you can reach out to us as well, obviously. I wanted to talk about testing, because like this is a great analogy between you as Fire TV team testing a bunch of different libraries for like working with Fire TV, obviously, and like you have 200 of them or whatever. And like the analogy for TV is significant, I think, because then you have project like DTV that exist on, Mike, you didn't say yet how many different platforms. So we are still waiting for that. So
A lot. Let's just put it that way.
how do you handle testing? Like specifically testing, manual, mix of manual and automated testing, like overall, what's your testing strategy for so many different targets?
Yeah, so this is interesting. My personal take on it is you need to have the three fundamental layers of testing, right? You have the micro layer, the unit testing layer, right? That's always important. You can test something in isolation and prove that it works. And then the theory is, okay, well, when you put the building blocks together, when you compose them together, you expect it to work, but that's not always the case, right? And especially because unit tests tend to have mocks, right? And I believe personally, and from experience, that mocking is usually the bane of any project's existence. Once you go down that route, it's very hard to come back from over-mocked things like components and just functions in general. So you got to start with the unit test, obviously. Integration test, my personal favorite. That's the sweet spot. That's where you're going to be able to balance performance, the runtime of your tests, alongside the coverage, that higher level coverage you're looking for. You can literally simulate the whole focus management or user journey of a user if you've written a sound integration test. And then finally, you need the automation test layer. And what we found from our experience at DirecTV is automation tests or end-to-end tests usually serve you best when they're simple, they're focused, and they cover the core user journeys to ensure that you're not breaking anything significant, right? They catch those things that during your pipeline execution. And again, we run our automation tests, our end-to-end tests for each of our given PRs in our pipeline during our development cycle. So just in summary, that layer, the automation layer, is important, but it should be used at that very user journey focused, isolated, kind of very, very simple layer to ensure that we're caching regressions at that very high level layer. We tend to avoid writing too many automation tests because they're going to take longer. That's why I like the integration layer. The integration layer is the best balance of speed and coverage. And the unit test layer is obviously very important too, but it usually tends to not cover the critical paths and ensure that everything works together harmoniously.
And also like the automation tests, they tend to run longer, but also as opposed to like unit test and integration test, you need to run them on all of your targets. So if you have integration only on JavaScript layer, you just run it once, or you have some specificities around the platforms, but maybe not as a whole. But then like automation tests, you need to like run them, 9 times or something like that. So that takes a lot of like the pipeline time, right?
Yep, it takes a lot of resources, and we leverage things like AWS Device Farm, right? We also have our own in-house, what we call essentially our spot where we have all our devices, right? We have our own in-house test devices where we run through our pipeline, all our automation tests. So we have a hybrid system of cloud and, our own hardware that we run our tests on. And the benefit and the key, I would say, is you need to make sure you have a system that can be highly parallelized, right? If you're kind of queuing up and don't have enough devices to support the execution of all your automation tests, your pipeline's going to get bogged down, and then your developers are going to be sitting there waiting for PRs to complete their jobs. So being able to have a clear framework in your pipeline that solves that problem of performance and parallelization of automation tests is key too at scale.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. So I think, for unit testing, most of the devs I work with and myself are using Jest. I think it's great for component level testing. I also think, since FireOS is built off, Android open source project, we benefit a ton from like ADB, like Android Debug Bridge, being able to, use both the simulator within Android Studio, both for tablets and TVs, but also just connecting to like the physical TV. I think also tools like, we've benefited a lot from, Flipper was great, but then, we've kind of moved off there. But I do think that like Charles Proxy, like for testing network connectivity. And then also, I don't think React Native testing library gets enough love. Like it really is great to be testing like on our testing library, like just be comparing what that experience is like on one platform versus another. And so having that standard, I know some of the team at Microsoft and some other folks have been contributing to it, but that one's super helpful. And then there's things like Flashlight, based on Lighthouse and some of the stuff that the obviously Callstack and the Theodo team have been working, or the BAM, now Theodo team have been working on, kind of really helping get that. The biggest thing is just getting that confidence. Something that matters to me a lot, but it's specific for every platform is, or every TV framework is just testing in-app purchasing. And so for us, like we have to kind of release like in-app testing, being able to do like integrated tests, being able to just automate, like does a purchase work? And then also things like most manufacturers like Roku, Google, Amazon, you can usually hit like a secret code on the remote or go to the settings and then you can get overlays. Like what's the current memory usage for your TV app while it's running? Like you kind of like unlock that developer mode. It's very similar to if you do it for web or mobile, but yeah, you kind of need that pack of tools to get that confidence across the three different layers like Mike mentioned.
Thanks for the summarization. It was great, Chris. For the React Native testing library that you mentioned, you said it doesn't get enough love from community or from stakeholders. You cannot imagine how many times I had to like explain to people, to some clients, to some stakeholders, how much work can you squeeze out of React Native testing library that then you don't have to do on the automation testing layer. How much you can shift from automation to integration, which is saving time, saving money on the pipeline, like saving developers time, because React Native developers, they know how to write those tests. Maybe in your specific scenario, they don't know how to write your automation test. Maybe you have a whole other team doing that. So like the feedback loop from integration testing needs to like have a better recognition inside project, inside teams.
So a surefire way to piss off your QA team, but we do it a lot with our partners and also our own team is, if we get into a debate of, well, the test passed, I'm like, show me the test, show me the actual script that what did it test, what did it check? If I see anything for TV that's like, did channel turn on, yes or no? Is screen blank, yes or no? Like that's not acceptable to the end user. And so I think like what's really important for TVs, to your point, is like you can't throw it over the fence, and no one's going to write better tests than the team that's actually building that experience. And we have to center on that. Yeah, I totally agree.
Call for papers for React Universe Conf 2025 is open. If you have bold ideas, big announcements, or deep technical insights, we want to hear from you. We're waiting for your submissions until the end of March at reactuniverseconf.com. Switching gears again from automation and integration testing, let's talk about manual testing. Over the past year, we had several different podcasts, blogs, and conference talks about TV subject. And there were two on App.js. One was from Gio and Eric from Amazon about TVs on App.js in Krakow. And the other one was from, sorry, I forgot right now and I don't have my notes near me. But in one of those, and I don't think it was the Amazon one, this guy was talking about manual testing for your TVs, for your TV project, and the struggles that they have to go through when they have, 8 different TVs and the same remote is working with all of them. So Mike, like, what's the manual QA situation in your project like?
It's something that can't be foregone. From my standpoint, it's what's proving that the end user is going to have a good experience because it's a physical human testing what you've built, right? So it's something that you can't remove from the testing equation, if you will, right? So for us, all of our PRs do go through the manual testing phase. And what we use is tools to analyze what user journeys should be tested from a manual standpoint. And it's not, let's say, super elaborate, but it allows the developer and the QA to understand what areas to focus on from a testing perspective. Not only that, it allows you to understand what platforms should be tested, right? And there's also that layer of communication that has to happen between the developer and the QA when we're talking about code changes that could affect multiple platforms. One of the things that tends to happen is you make a code change in a shared component, whether that be a higher order component, whether it actually be a UI component, actual Leaf component that's shown to the end user, which you can and we do build targeting multiple platforms. You make one change that affects one platform differently than another. And if you're not writing tests to assert upon this, which we're in the process of building our own multi-platform integration layer testing to have better developer ergonomics, what ends up happening is you'll end up breaking something that you didn't expect. So that communication between your manual QA during your code change for your PR that's being reviewed, that QA needs to understand what areas to focus on. And that's where the communication is so key. Right. So we list out, as part of our PR process, list out the areas of impact. The developer provides that information. We also have tooling that provides the information on the PR. And then we also provide the platforms of impact or platforms of interest that we should focus on. So if you're testing, for example, if you're changing shared code and it actually is targeting all the platforms, you need to list all the platforms. So that's how that kind of workflow really helps us on our teams to ensure that we're preventing regression that maybe your unit test or your integration test or your automation test won't be able to catch.
Wukash, I think you were talking about the AWS Conf last year. Was it Max Phillips's talk on TV apps in the wild?
Yes, thank you. Yes, that definitely. Sorry, Max, I forgot. I watched the whole conference. I watched your talk. It was great. Thank you so much for bringing TV development out in the world for all of us developers. Sorry that I forgot your name.
Go, Max.
We're gonna link Max in the show notes so you can watch this talk and give him the credit that he deserves. Talking about manual testing, from the work that I did on TV development, I know that it is challenging to have all of those TVs in your home, in your room. There are ways to make it easier for you. So we've used capture cards, for example. I don't have to have all of the different TVs. I can have those TV sticks like Fire TV from Amazon, or I can have Apple TV, or I have
Android TV.
Are you using like a Elgato capture? Like what are you using for the HDMI?
I'm using the cheapest one that I got from Amazon. It's like, I don't know, $5 or something.
Wow.
I don't know.
Okay.
And it works. And it makes it easier for you to just use your regular monitor.
It's so true. One of the things you lose, or some people lose, when they're taking that approach, though, is capture cards and ultimately the respective OS, because Mac OS does a really good job of DRM, preventing you from actually seeing video playing when you're using a capture card. So I know a lot of capture cards I shouldn't say capture cards. You suffer from utilizing a capture card because you're not going to actually see the video playing. So you might not get the full experience that an end user would. But there are some, I'm not going to lie, there's some capture cards on Amazon, and I don't know if they realize they're doing it. They're actually accidentally removing DRM, and you can actually play it on your screen. So
this is where I pretend I'm a lawyer and I say Amazon, the marketplace where you can buy things.
Yeah, and you don't expect it, right?
Not
the goal is
TV.
not intentional, right? You just kind of grab it. You're like, oh, I need a capture card to make my development easier. And you're like, why is the video actually streaming on this?
It's interesting because I usually complain more about using the simulator because for my team, we'll have this confidence on a sample we're building or some app we're testing on the simulator. And you're like, that's using your laptop that has a massive processor, has a ton of power, and you're not getting that confidence of how does it work on a $40 TV stick? Yeah. So it is interesting, the playback, the tension between, but can't, I thought on a capture card, I have routed the traffic so that it was able to play. You're saying, oh, I see what you're saying. It's, once it goes through the HDMI pass, it's doing the check, and then that's where it's getting blocked.
Yeah. Really, overall, though, the capture card solution, even if you are prevented from viewing the stream itself, it's still an invaluable tool. I swap in and out all day long between my 3 Fire Sticks that I have. I have a Gen 2, which is a lot of fun to boot up when you're like, oh, new performance issue. We got to make sure we find the root cause, to 4K Max, to swapping into my Apple TV, right? I'll swap that in. my 4K. And then, even some you can't use the capture card on certain things. Like, for example, Tizen or Samsung TV, you're stuck with a TV. They don't make sticks. So you're going to have a TV and you're like this one over here, and you're going to have it in your office where you're testing your app to make sure that it's going to be, a sound, enjoyable experience for your user. Because again, the simulators can only do so much for you, right? You're going to get the horsepower, like Chris is saying, when you're running it in a simulator on you. And they have the throttles and they have ways to pare it down, but still it's not going to be the same, which you can't, it's indispensable to have the actual TV,
That's also pretty comparable to just regular Android development, right? Like you cannot rely on Android simulator. You have to take out of your drawer this like 6-year-old Motorola phone or something and like try to make it work there, like on the smaller screen with the less processing power, etc.
I think too, that's bringing it back to React Native. Like I was looking at the different Fire devices we have all the way back to 2014, first generation Fire TV stick. And it's like one thing that's pretty important if you're building for TVs is to be checking, like doing smart targeting, checking the device you're on. You don't want one package, when you're submitting to the App Store, you want to make sure you have a package that's optimized for older devices. Those are customers you don't want to leave without a solution. And so, yeah, you're going to have to make decisions on what animations should we forego? How should we do, is lazy loading even capable on, an Android, from 10 years ago, we're talking Android 5. So that's just like wildly different from, the current stats that we're at. So really being smart about nothing's going to replace like having that testing bank, really getting that confidence of how does this experience work for the millions of customers on this specific device that they're on. Obviously, we're doing our work to make sure folks are getting newer devices, staying up to date. But the reality is you will have people streaming on an 8-year-old device, and you can decide, do we say, sorry, not our problem, like IE6 style, or are we going to say, we still want them to be able to watch the content they love?
I think we touched on this topic in some of our earlier episodes about TVs, which is, so you bought this Fire TV stick, let's say 10 years ago. Now you are upgrading your main screen in your home. Are you going to throw out this Fire TV stick, or you're going to put it in your basement at your attic? Like, this is still working. You can still...
And it was probably set up by a loved one years ago that you didn't set up. How often do I find out from my family, oh, how did we set this thing up? And then I discover, oh, it's an old Sony TV, but it has a newer stick. But yeah, it's like, yeah. And people switch, but obviously people switch between streaming providers and players all the time. Yeah.
Okay, I want to wrap up, so I'm going to ask again a pop quiz to both of you. And Mike, this time around, I want you to have the answer, like fast answer, with no nuances, okay? No nuances this time. And you are going to be first this time. So, top 3 things that you want our listeners to remember about React Native, React TV development in general, good and bad. Go.
Yeah, so the good parts, right? You can, again, focus on the business rules. So you're not so much thinking, how do I implement this on this platform and make this feature work for this specific case, right? You don't think about that as much, right? It's not going to solve all your problems, but it's going to allow you to focus on what matters, which is your user and your business requirements. The bad parts. Okay, so let's talk about a bad part example. Dealing with focus management, cross-platform nuances. That is one of my, not necessarily least favorite things, but it's difficult. And when you run into a focus-specific bug, it requires you to understand how to use your debugging tools and your debugging techniques to find the root cause. And then once you find it, you need to determine how to make it cross-platform. So that's the next step, right? It's taking it to the next level. So those are like good and bad pieces that personally I've experienced over the years.
Cool. Chris, now it's your turn.
I would say that for React Native, for Fire TV or building for whatever, I would say I love that it helps our team with code reusability. In fact, I would argue that React Native has helped our team and a lot of the devs we work with just work better together as a team. It's almost like an escape room. You have to solve the problem together. You can't work in isolation. And to make it more practical, like anytime you've had to, with a remote, have to type in a username and password or an email and password, like a team is failing. Like that is just, someone has not thought about that first launch experience. And so shout out to all the teams that really think through that. I think also with just flexibility, like there is an aspect of choose your own adventure. There is open source projects. You could build it yourself. You can make things a turbo nitro module, and like really having that decision structure of like, what do we have at our disposal versus what do we need to make ourselves? I think it gives you a starting point. And then I also think just the annoying yet smart nature of React Native is there is always frequent updates that you got to keep your dependencies in the core up to date. The upside of that is it's a nightmare for us when we discover a dev built an Android app and hasn't touched it in years. I would much rather be continually, that concept of Kaizen, slow and steady improvements is way more valuable over time than these big monolithic updates that break everything. And so that nature of like, we're going to constantly be keeping things tuned and primed is great. And so, yeah, no, I could like, I don't want to be like a salesman for Fire TV. But obviously I strongly believe, we would love to have great apps on our platform. But I do think at the end of the day, as a React Native dev, like our hope is to make it as easy as possible for you to build for us and for us, the other TV providers. So
I think all of the examples that you gave, Chris, at the end were a mix of good and bad, honestly.
The agony and the ecstasy of building with React Native for TVs.
One thing that people don't realize is the barrier to entry is low, right? You can get involved in TV development and the setup is streamlined, right? You can get in there and start building something and not worry about a ton of things that you need to figure out in order to get it running. You know, for me, you can boot up a new application in a couple hours, which is really impressive, right? You can have focus management working, you can have it running on multiple platforms, and it's really gratifying because you're not going to get that if you're building a tvOS specific app. You're not going to get that if you're building an Android specific app. You're building it again. You know what I mean? And there are multi-platform other options, like, you can leverage multi-platform Kotlin development, but there are just so many additional benefits you get with React Native and that keep that barrier very low to entry.
I'd love to plug our guide to React Native TV book, but I don't have it near me anywhere. So we've created Callstack and Amazon, and I'm one of the co-authors. Chris was co-author as well. He did a great job of making sure that book is like what it is now. We created this guide to React Native TV development. It speaks volumes about this start. You can start with this boilerplate. You can start with Expo. You can start bare bones. You can start from all of the different directions, how to do focus management, how to do state management, how to do accessibility. It's not lengthy, but if you want to dig into React Native TV development, just download this book from show notes and you're going to be set.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting on that book, it was really fun to work with alongside you, Mikey, Anisha, Gio, Neha. I think what's interesting is so many mobile teams, what we're seeing is, yes, you have your big brands, your Netflixes, your Hulus, but the fastest growth I'm seeing where folks are asking us for this book and how the heck do we get on TVs is honestly three categories. It's health and fitness. So think your up and coming Pelotons, your doctor's app that has physical therapy videos that were only for mobile. And they're like, oh crap, we should probably build this also for TV. Faith-based. So a lot of, churches, those type of groups, they have an online audience. And so being on a Fire TV stick is really important, streaming. And then the last one is, honestly, education / masterclass type stuff where you're paying for a subscription. A lot of them actually start only on the web and mobile. And as they mature, inevitably, they're going to want to go on the big screen. And so I think what's exciting is that one of the biggest trends we're seeing is multi-device using while you're watching, and then also connected apps. You pay for a service, and as a plus, you get some great content. And obviously, we want that content to look beautiful on our big, massive TVs.
There's so much more to talk about this, and I have 3 different digressions right now. But I really want to wrap up this episode in 1 hour for our viewers, for our listeners, and to all of you that are listening and watching us right now. Let us know what you think in the comments. Let us know don't let us know. Just go ahead and try to create a TV app. You will see our struggles, but also some of the good parts that we talked about. And yes, thank you guys so much for joining me here. Chris and Mike, thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks for having us.